The egg split open with a sound like wet paper tearing. No one cheered. No one even stepped closer. The three alien medical staff standing in the room simply looked at each other, and the look said everything. They had already seen the scan results. They already knew. The hatchling came out small, dark-scaled, and wrong. Her chest moved in shallow, uneven pulls. Each breath had a catch in it, like something inside was fighting to open and losing. Her eyes were shut. Her claws scraped weakly at the floor of the incubation tray. She was alive, but only barely, and by the look on Dr. Pell's face, that was not going to be celebrated. Dr. Pell was the lead veterinarian on the GBC Preserve Station. He had worked with 17 species over a long career. He had seen sick animals, broken animals, animals that should have died and somehow did not. He was not a cold being. He was just experienced, and experience had taught him the difference between a hard case and a pointless one. He ran the scanner slowly over the hatchling. The results came back the same as the pre-hatch scan. Both lungs underdeveloped, the left one barely functional, the right one working at about 40%. In a healthy Vethkai newborn, the lungs expanded dramatically in the first hour after hatching, filling with a special dense breath that would sustain the dragon for the first days of life. This one could not do that. She would struggle through every hour, every minute, until her body simply gave out. Pell wrote his report. It took 4 minutes. He marked the hatchling as non-viable and recommended immediate humane euthanasia to prevent prolonged suffering. Director Orvin reviewed the report, asked one question about resource costs, and signed the declaration within 6 hours of hatching. Lost cause official stamped. The job of preparing the hatchling for the end-of-life process was given to Rael Duno. That was the kind of job that went to low-ranked aides. Rael had been on the station for 8 months, assigned to general xenobiological support. He cleaned equipment, logged feeding data, helped move animals between enclosures. He was quiet, reliable, and mostly invisible to the senior staff. No one thought twice about giving him the task. He picked up the assignment on his data pad, read it once, and walked down to the containment room. The room was small and kept warm for the hatchling's benefit. There was a soft heat lamp in the corner and a shallow tray on a low table. The hatchling was still in the tray. Someone had placed a folded medical cloth beneath her so the metal would not press against her scales. That small kindness made Rael stop for a moment. He stood in the doorway and looked at her. She was about the length of his forearm. Her scales were a deep gray blue, still damp in places. Her wings were folded tight against her back, too tight like she was holding herself together. Her chest moved up, caught, dropped. Up, caught, dropped. Each breath was a small struggle that she was losing slowly. Rael set his bag down on the floor. He took out the preparation kit. He looked at it. Then he put it back. He walked to the tray and crouched down so his face was level with the hatchling. She did not react. Her eyes were still shut. But after a moment, one of her claws moved, scratching lightly at the cloth beneath her, the way a young animal searches for something solid to hold onto. Rael sat down cross-legged on the floor. He did not fully understand why. He had followed orders for 8 months without question. He was not the kind of person who made scenes or argued with authority. But there was something about the scratch of that small claw against the cloth that moved through his chest like a hook. She was not giving up. She did not know she was supposed to. He sat there for a long time. The heat lamp hummed. The hatchling's breathing stayed shallow and broken. Rael watched the pattern of it, counted the seconds between each catch, noted that they were irregular but not worsening. She was not improving, but she was also not declining. After an hour, he picked up his data pad and typed a message to Dr. Pell. It was a short message. He asked for 72 hours before the process was completed. He gave no reasons. He simply asked. He sent it and put the pad down. The hatchling made a small sound, not a cry, more like the tail end of a breath that had almost gone wrong but corrected at the last second. Rael looked at her. She still had not opened her eyes. He reached out slowly and rested 2 fingers very lightly on the side of her neck, just below the jaw, where the scale pattern was thinner. He could feel her pulse there, fast and thin, like a bird's. He left his fingers in place and breathed slowly and said nothing. No one responded to his message that night. He stayed anyway. Word moved through a small station, the way water moved through cracks, quietly, quickly, and into every corner. By the 3rd hour after his message went unanswered, at least 4 staff members had walked past the containment room window to look in. They saw Rael Duno, a low-ranked aide, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to a dying hatchling, doing nothing that looked like preparing for the end-of-life process. By the 6th hour, the number of people who had heard about it was closer to 14. No one came in to stop him. No one came in to help him either. Nurse Tavin came closest. Tavin was the medical assistant on the overnight shift, an insectoid species with 4 arms and a habit of moving silently that most other staff found unsettling but Rael had always respected. Tavin stopped at the window, watched for a moment, then went away. 20 minutes later, Tavin came back carrying a small supply case and stepped through the door. Rael looked up. Tavin set the case on the table without a word. Inside were basic monitoring patches, a thermal wrap, and a nutrient solution approved for neonatal reptilian species. Nothing that had been requested, nothing officially authorized. "She is not declining," Tavin said. The translator rendered the voice as flat and precise. "That is unusual." "I know," Rael said. Tavin looked at the hatchling for a moment, then left again. That was all, but the supplies were real and the door was unlocked. Rael worked through the night. He attached a monitoring patch behind the hatchling's left foreleg where the skin was softer. He wrapped the thermal cloth loosely around her lower body so her core temperature would stay stable without adding pressure to her chest. He did not try to feed her yet. Her system was not ready for that. What he did do was tap. It was something he had read once in a very old archive, a file about premature human infants from centuries ago, before medicine had all its current tools. Skin contact, rhythmic sound, warmth and presence, things that cost nothing and that the body somehow knew how to respond to. He did not know if any of it applied to a Vethkai dragon. He had no reason to believe it would. But the hatchling had no other options, and neither did he. He tapped a slow, steady rhythm on the side of the tray with 2 fingers. Not loud, just present. A pulse. He matched it roughly to a resting heartbeat. He kept it going even when his hand got tired, switching fingers, switching hands, never stopping. Around the 2nd hour of tapping, the hatchling's breathing changed. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would have impressed Dr. Pell, but the catches between each breath spaced out slightly. The rhythm became just a little less frantic. Rael kept tapping. At dawn, Director Orvin came. Orvin was a tall being, reptilian, with smooth gray-green scales and the permanent expression of someone calculating the cost of everything they looked at. He stood in the doorway of the containment room with his arms folded and looked at Rael with something between irritation and confusion. "The process was scheduled," Orvin said. "I sent a message requesting 72 hours, Rael said. He did not stand up. He kept his hand near the tray. "I did not approve that request." "I noticed," Rael said. "I stayed anyway. I apologize for the irregularity. I have overnight data if you want to see it." Orvin stared at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the hatchling. Then he looked at the monitoring display on the table, which Tavin had quietly switched on sometime during the night. The numbers were not good. The lung function readings were still critical, but the distress indicators had dropped from the previous evening. The hatchling's pulse, while still fast, had steadied. "What did you do?" Orvin asked. The question was genuinely curious despite his tone. "Kept her warm, kept a rhythm going, stayed close." Rael paused. "On my planet, very early births were handled this way before we had better options. Presence and rhythm kept the body's own systems working when they were too weak to work alone. I don't know if it applies here. But the numbers moved in the right direction. Orvin was quiet for a moment. He was calculating. Rael could almost see it. 48 hours, Orvin said finally. This will be logged as a human methodology observation case. If there is no meaningful improvement by then, the declaration stands. He left without waiting for a response. Rael turned back to the hatchling. He started tapping again. Sometime during the mid-morning hours, the hatchling opened her eyes for the first time. They were a pale gold, slightly unfocused, blinking slowly against the light. She did not look at anything in particular, but her head turned by a small degree in the direction of Rael's hand. Toward the rhythm. Rael did not smile, he just kept tapping, even and steady, present. A little later, one small claw reached out from beneath the thermal wrap and closed around the edge of his sleeve. It held on. Rael looked down at it. He did not move his arm, he did not pull away. He tapped with his other hand and let her hold on for as long as she needed to. On the fourth day, Rael found something buried in the station's research archive that almost no one had looked at in 60 years. It was a field study, incomplete, written by a xenobiologist who had managed to observe a wild Vethkai nest for 11 days before the dragons disappeared. Most of the file was about physical measurements and feeding behavior, but near the end, almost as a footnote, the researcher had written this. The adult dragons did not simply lie beside the young. They rumbled, a low, continuous vibration that came from deep in the chest. The hatchlings pressed against the adults and their breathing synchronized with the sound. The researcher had called it a respiratory entrainment behavior and noted that it was probably important, then moved on to describing the size of the nest. Rael read that footnote 4 times. Then he sat next to Sora's tray and tried to hum. It was not elegant. He had no real singing voice and no idea what the correct frequency was. He started low, adjusted, went lower, adjusted again. He watched the monitoring display while he did it. For a while nothing changed. Then on his third adjustment, Sora's breathing stuttered and steadied, just slightly, just enough to be real. He stayed on that frequency. Dr. Pell came by later that afternoon, which had become a quiet habit. Pell had not officially changed his position on the hatchling's prognosis. He had not withdrawn the lost cause declaration, but he had started stopping in to look at the data, and his visits were getting longer. Rael showed him the footnote. Pell read it standing up, then sat down and read it again. We never had a live hatchling long enough to observe this, Pell said quietly. I know, Rael said. No one did. That's probably why no one thought to replicate it. Pell was quiet for a long time. He watched Sora, who was breathing with somewhat more regularity than she had 4 days ago. Not normal, not even close to normal, but more regular. There was a pattern now where before there had only been chaos. If the vibration is doing what the record suggests, Pell said slowly, then the problem is consistency. You cannot hum around the clock. No, Rael agreed. I've been thinking about that. What have you been thinking? Rael pulled up a rough diagram he had sketched on his data pad. It was simple, a soft harness, light enough not to restrict chest movement, fitted with a small vibration element that could be tuned to the correct frequency and run continuously. The kind of device that did not exist in any medical catalog because no one had ever needed it before. Pell looked at the diagram for a long time. Then he stood up and went to his supply room without explanation. He came back with a small engineering kit and a box of soft medical-grade materials. I have not built anything from scratch in a long time, Pell said. He did not sound unhappy about it. They worked together for most of the afternoon. Rael cut and shaped the harness material while Pell handled the vibration element, calibrating it against the frequency Rael had found. Sora watched them from the tray with her pale gold eyes. She was more alert than she had been in the first days, tracking movement in the room, reacting to sound. She still struggled with every breath, but she was present in a way she had not been before, and that felt like something. The harness fit on the second try. They powered it on at low setting. Sara went very still. Then her chest rose, fell, rose again. The rhythm of it matched the vibration exactly, as if some part of her recognized what it was supposed to feel like, as if her body had been waiting for this frequency since before she hatched. Pell said nothing. He stood there watching the monitor for 3 full minutes. "The right lung reading just moved," he said finally. His voice was careful, the way a being speaks when they are trying not to react too quickly to something they might still be misreading. 0.4%. That could be noise. "It could be," Rael said. They watched for another 5 minutes. The reading held. Pell sat down heavily in the spare chair. He rubbed a hand over his face in a gesture so universal that Rael recognized it across the species difference without any trouble. It was the gesture of someone revising something they had been certain about. "She should not be alive," Pell said, not as a complaint, not as a criticism, as a plain statement of what he knew versus what was in front of him. "I know," Rael said. Outside the window, Tavin stood in the corridor making a quiet note in the station log. The entry was brief. It said that bonding behavior between the hatchling and the human aid was ongoing and appeared to be stable. It noted the new harness device and the lung reading. At the end, in the field marked additional observations, Tavin added 4 words. "Hatchling responds to presence." Tavin saved the log, turned off the corridor light, and let the two of them sit together in the warm hum of the room. On the 14th day, the GBC main council found out that the hatchling was still alive, and everything became complicated. It was not that anyone had hidden information. The station logs were accessible. Someone on the council's data review team had simply not been reading them closely, and then one day they did, and the word moved upward fast. A living Vethkai hatchling, 2 weeks old, bonded, gaining weight. The species had not produced a documented live captive hatchling in over 40 years. The cultural and political weight of it reached the council chambers before Rael even knew the council had been informed. Councillor Bren arrived the next morning. Bren was not what Rael expected. He had prepared himself for someone like Orvin, cool, calculating, already composing a budget justification in their head. Bren was older, moved quietly, and spent the first 10 minutes simply standing at the window of the containment room watching Sara without saying anything. Sara had grown. She was still small, still in the harness, still breathing with effort, but she moved around the enclosure now. She had knocked over a water dish twice and shown no regret about it. Her eyes tracked Rael whenever he was in the room. "She watches you," Bren said finally. "She does," Rael agreed. "That is a bonding indicator," Bren said. "A deep one by the look of it. The station log has the documentation. Nurse Tavin has been tracking it since day 1. Bren nodded slowly. Then he turned from the window and looked at Rael directly. "I want to be honest with you. The council is very interested in her survival. A living Vethkai is significant to several species who have been advocating for formal GBC protection of the remaining wild population. Her existence is valuable. Her continued care matters." Rael waited, because he could hear the second half of that sentence coming. "We have a facility," Bren continued. "Better than this one. Full specialist staff, the best equipment available, a habitat section that was built with Vethkai physiology in mind. We built it 3 years ago in anticipation of a preservation effort that never found any subjects. She would receive care there that this station cannot provide." "And I would not go with her," Rael said. Bren did not look away. "You are not a specialist. The transfer protocol does not cover general aids." "If you separate us, her breathing will regress," Rael said. "We tested it. 2 weeks ago, Director Orvin asked me to step out for a routine inspection. I was out of the room for 40 minutes. By the time I came back, her distress indicators had gone up by 30% and she had pulled at the harness until the fitting loosened. The bond is not a preference. It is a medical factor now. I read that entry, Bren said. Then you know moving her without me is not a care improvement. It is a risk. Bren was quiet. He was not arguing. He was thinking, and Rael had already learned to tell the difference. The Council, Bren said carefully, has a proposal on the table to use a bonding interruption protocol, a mild chemical process that would reduce the bond attachment over several weeks, making transfer safer. Rael kept his face even. When is the vote? 3 days. Rael said nothing more. He thanked Bren for the information, saw him to the corridor, and went back inside. Sara was at the edge of her enclosure, watching the door. When Rael sat down, she crossed the space between them and pressed the side of her head against his knee. The harness hummed softly. Her breathing was as steady as it ever got. Tavin found Rael that evening bent over his data pad building something. Not a diagram this time. A document. Organized, careful, with data tables and timeline records and footnotes. Every log entry, every monitor reading, every improvement mapped against every intervention. The vote is in 3 days, Rael said without looking up. I know, Tavin said. I need to submit a formal objection before then. Through proper channels, everything correct. Tavin was quiet for a moment. You have never submitted a formal objection to anything. No, Rael said, but she cannot submit one herself. Tavin sat down across from him and pulled up a second data pad. The formatting protocol for a GBC care objection has 7 required sections. I have filled 2 of them before. A pause. I will walk you through the rest. They worked past midnight. Rael wrote carefully, factually, without emotion. He wrote about lung function and bonding regression. He wrote about the harness and what it had taken to build it. He wrote about 40 years of failed captive hatchlings and what had been different this time. He did not write about sitting on the floor on the first night or about a small claw gripping the edge of his sleeve. That was not the kind of thing that belonged in a formal document. But it was the reason the document existed, and he knew that, and it was enough. He submitted it at the 14th hour, before the scheduled vote. Then he went back to Sora's enclosure and sat beside her in the dark while the harness hummed, and she slept with her chin resting on his shoe. The council chamber was larger than Rael had expected, and colder. It was a circular room with tiered seating arranged around a central floor. 12 council members from 9 different species. Screens along the walls showing data feeds and procedural notes. A single standing position at the center, which was where Rael was told to go. He had never spoken to a room like this. He had grown up quiet, worked quiet, stayed in the background of everything. He was not the kind of person rooms were arranged around. He stood in the center and felt the size of the space, and then he stopped thinking about that and looked at his data pad instead. Counselor Bren had arranged the session. He had not promised any outcome. He had simply told Rael that the formal objection created a procedural right to address the council before the vote, and that Rael should use it well. One of the council members, a large being with a flat head and pale eyes, spoke first. You are Rael Duno, Xenobiological Aide, rank 4, 8 months of station service. The tone was not unkind, but it was precise in the way that reminded Rael of a label being read off a box. You have submitted an objection to the bonding interruption protocol proposed for the Vethkai hatchling designated subject Sora. You may present. Rael presented. He did not speak about how he felt. He spoke about lung function percentages and the rate of improvement over 14 days. He showed the breathing data from night 1 and the breathing data from day 14, and let the distance between the 2 lines carry the argument. He explained the harness and the vibration frequency. He described the regression event, 40 minutes of separation, 30% distress increase, and displayed the monitor logs from that hour. He cited the 60-year-old field study, and explained what it had told him about respiratory entrainment that no current medical literature had recorded. He spoke for 11 minutes. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. Then the same flat-headed council member said, "You are one aide with no specialist credentials presenting anecdotal evidence as medical protocol." "I am," Rail said, "and the hatchling is alive and she should not be, by every assessment this station made on her first day." He paused. "All the credentials in this room agreed with that assessment. I was the only person in that room who did not, and at the time I had no qualifications to justify disagreeing. I just did not start the process." The room was quiet. "The bond interruption protocol is a risk," Rail continued. "The data shows that. What I am asking for is not special treatment and not a permanent arrangement. I am asking for one formal designation, primary bonded caretaker, with provisional care authority in her case until she reaches a medically stable status. It is a small thing. It keeps the work already done from being undone." Another council member, a slender being with long fingers, leaned forward. "If we set this precedent, any bonded aide could claim care authority over any subject. The bond would need to be documented from the first day, show consistent behavioral evidence, and be medically significant to the subject's treatment outcomes," Rail said. "All three are true here. Not all three are commonly true. The precedent would not be easy to replicate without the same circumstances." Bren spoke from his seat. "The object of this session is whether the bond interruption protocol proceeds to vote. The aide's objection specifically requests that it be tabled pending a provisional caretaker designation review. I move to separate the two actions." There was procedural discussion. Rail stood in the center of the room and waited. He was very aware of his hands, which he was holding still with some effort. He thought about Sara, who was currently in the care of Nurse Tavin and who had, according to Tavin's last message, eaten a small portion of soft protein for the first time that morning, and then sat with her head tilted at a strange angle for several minutes, as if she was not sure what to do with the experience of feeling full. He thought about her sitting like that, confused and alive, and the effort of keeping his hands still became easier. The procedural discussion ended. The vote was called not on the bond interruption, but on the provisional designation. 12 members. Rail counted as the indicators registered. 6, 7. He stopped counting and just waited. 8. The designation passed. He thanked the council, which felt insufficient but was the correct thing to do. He thanked Bren in the corridor outside, which felt more real. Bren looked at him for a moment with an expression Rail could not read across the species difference, then nodded once and walked away. Rail took the transit corridor back to the containment section. Tavin was outside the room, arms folded, watching through the window. Inside, Sara was packing the length of her enclosure in a slow, deliberate circuit, which was new behavior from the last few days. She moved carefully, testing each step, like she was learning the size of her own body. "She has been doing that for 2 hours, Tavin said. "She stopped when you left this morning and started again an hour ago." Rail watched her pace. Her harness hummed against her chest. Her breathing was not steady, would never be fully steady, but it was hers and it was continuous, and it had been continuous for 14 days. He put his hand on the door. Inside, Sara turned before he opened it. She always turned before he opened it. 3 months after the night Rail had sat down on a containment room floor and refused to move, Sara breathed without the harness for the first time. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Rail had been cleaning the enclosure while she watched him with her usual expression of mild judgment. He had removed the harness temporarily, as he did each day for the cleaning interval, and usually had it back on within 10 minutes. This time, halfway through the interval, he realized 20 minutes had passed. Sara was sitting in the middle of her enclosure, breathing, not perfectly. There was still a catch in the left side, still a slight irregularity in the rhythm, But she was doing it on her own, and she had been doing it for 20 minutes without distress and without the harness, and her monitor numbers were holding. Rael finished cleaning very slowly. Then he sat down and watched her breathe for a long time. He sent a message to Dr. Pell with the time stamp and the readings attached. Pell's response came back within 2 minutes and said only, "I see it." The formality of everything Pell usually wrote had been stripped away, and what was left was just those 3 words, and Rael understood them completely. The days that followed involved more tests, more measurements, more carefully recorded data. Pell was thorough even now, especially now. The results confirmed what that first unplanned 20-minute window had shown. Sora's right lung had developed compensatory tissue, not a healing, not a correction, but an adaptation. Her body had found another way. The left lung remained limited. She would never breathe with the full capacity of a healthy Vethkai. Her lifespan would likely be shorter than average for her species. But shorter than average for a Vethkai was still a very long time, and she was alive, and the lung function she had was her own. Pell wrote the formal report. He marked her status as stable. He appended a section recommending that the vibration harness design be shared with other preservation stations. Before he submitted it, he changed her classification from the old one, the one from day 1, and typed in its place, "Precedent case." Within 2 weeks, requests for the harness specifications arrived from 3 other stations. Counselor Bren contacted Rael with the news that a formal Vethkai preservation program was being established, with Sora's case as its foundation document. Bren had been quiet about the political details, but Rael understood that something larger had shifted in how the council talked about the species. One living dragon had done what decades of closed-door advocacy had not managed to do. She had made the argument real. Rael was offered a formal position in the new program: researcher, xenobiological bonding specialist. It was several ranks above what he currently held. The work would involve travel, documentation, building on everything that had been learned in the containment room over 3 months. He read the offer twice. Then he sent a reply asking one question. The answer came back the next day, after what he assumed were several internal discussions that no one told him about. The answer was yes, provisional, logged, with conditions attached that were longer than the original offer document. But yes. He told Sora that evening, which was not something he did because he thought she understood words. He did it because she was there, and it felt incomplete to not say it out loud to the being who had made all of it happen simply by refusing to die. She pressed her head against his shoulder while he talked, which she did when she wanted to feel the vibration of his voice. Her eyes were half closed. She was warm and heavy and smelled like the dry stone scent all Vethkai apparently carried, which Rael had grown so used to that he no longer noticed it unless he thought about it. On the morning of the transfer, the whole containment section was quiet. Tavin had arranged a small goodbye with no ceremony, which was exactly right. Pell shook Rael's hand and held it for a moment. Orvin, to his credit, came down from his office and said that the outcome had exceeded his projections, which from Orvin was genuine and warm. Rael went in to get Sora. She was standing in the center of her enclosure, and she spread her wings when he entered. She had done this before, small tests, brief moments. But this time she held them open and she was bigger than she had been, and the wings caught the light from the heat lamp, and the gray-blue scales on the inner surface turned silver at the edges, and she held the position for a long, still moment. Rael did not move, he waited. She folded them back. She crossed the room and walked past him to the open door without looking back, as if she had decided and that was the end of it. Rael followed her out. Tavin stood in the corridor with a data pad making the last entry in a log that had been running for 3 months. The entry was brief. Tavin wrote the date, the transfer status, the patient's current condition. In the final field marked Outcome Summary, Tavin wrote 4 lines. Caretaker designation, permanent. Patient status, alive. Prognosis, unknown as it has always been. Human reasoning still not fully understood. Outcome sufficient. Tavin saved the log and closed the file. Down the corridor, Sora's claws made a quiet, steady sound against the floor, and Rael walked beside her and they went.